Alrighty, welcome back to the Defying Gravity podcast with Zach Goodman. Today we're going to talk about sprint programming. Specifically, I'm going to outline why do we sprint. We're going to talk about some common sprinting mistakes, speed training mistakes. I'm going to give you guys some structure and some programming today about how exactly I'm able to sprint my athletes, how we kind of design that, how we prep for that, and then how we integrate sprinting into our traditional strength workouts as well. So we're kind of hitting a lot of different things in about 4 sessions a week. So we're gonna get right into this. So firstly, why do we need to sprint? The most important thing to understand about sprinting is that sprinting is the most dynamic and the fastest thing that we can do. Okay, it cannot be replicated in the weight room. This is very true. I hear a lot of people say this. This is very true. Okay. You cannot replicate anything that fast. The ground contacts, okay, are faster than anything else we can get. And so with that, that means that your nervous system is going to get a very severe and potent stimulus because it is moving so fast. There's so much mass being displaced at such high speeds. Okay. So think kind of on the opposite end of a 1 rep max squat where we are recruiting maximal motor units, we're recruiting high threshold motor units through straining. Okay. Sprinting is going to recruit high threshold motor units, but through a different avenue. Okay. And that's going to be with the speed component, that max velocity component. Okay. What we know about the nervous system is the nervous system will only output or recruit high threshold motor units when it is absolutely necessary. The two most stressful or most potent stimulus we can give the body is going to be through straining with heavy resistances. Okay. Or moving submaximal resistance or mass at high velocities. Okay. Sprinting is by far the fastest thing we can do, and you're going to move more mass, aka your body mass, at a faster speed than you could move any weight in the weight room. Okay. So it's the most dynamic thing we can do. So we're going to train a specific part of the max velocity part of the force velocity curve. Okay. You're going to be touching speeds, well over 9 meters plus per second, depending on how fast you are. Again, 10, 11 meters per second. You're going to be touching very, very fast speeds. Okay. Depending on your distance, depending on how fast you are, depending on if you're running on the concrete or basketball court or track with spikes. Okay. Those will all make a difference. But either way, under any conditions, this is still faster than anything else we do. This is much faster than jumping. Sprinting is multiples faster than jumping. Even acceleration starts, okay, 10-yard dash is still faster than jumping. Okay. So what that means is for the foot and the ankle. Okay, we've talked about the foot and the ankle on this podcast. I know I talk a lot about this on social media. When it comes to the foot and ankle complex, this is kind of the part where a lot of people are leaking force, as you may hear it referred to. Many athletes, especially if they're committed to training, they're usually pretty strong, at least relatively, if they train correctly, above the knee. Okay, the hips, the glutes, the hamstrings, the quads. Okay, all those different muscle groups that make the body go. But a lot of people, specifically a lot of athletes, especially young athletes, really are severely underdeveloped below the knee. Okay, so we're talking about the calf, we're talking about the ankle, we're talking about the feet, and all the muscles and tendons and ligaments that are within that. Many athletes simply just do not have the strength, and part of that is just lifestyle. Okay, athletes are nowadays are less active than they used to be, at least generally when they're young. Okay, even though they play tons of AAU games and all these different sports, they're still not running around and playing outside. They're sitting inside playing Fortnite. They are, in school all day, and many schools don't have physical education, or if they do have physical education, they're not getting the amount of movement they may need. A lot of places are again implementing more tech and more, kind of more opportunity to sit around, which means less opportunity for them to move and create and kind of accrue ground contacts. Okay. Sprinting is going to train the foot and ankle to be elastic. It's going to train the foot and ankle to be strong. It's going to train the foot and ankle to not only absorb, but also redisperse force into the ground. And the stronger an athlete's foot and ankle is, the more precise and kind of with precision force is going to be put into the ground. Okay, we don't want force to hit the ground and kind of disperse or break apart. We want to create a really tight pocket. And the only way for you to create a tight pocket of force when you impact the ground is to have a strong and stiff ankle and foot, okay, along with elastic tendons. Okay, sprinting is going to be the best exercise. Do that more so than any other like plyometric. Okay, sprinting is the best plyometric. It is by far the fastest plyometric. Okay, more so than like other type of jumping based plyometrics like hops and things like that, skipping. Okay, sprinting is by far going to be the most impactful and dynamic and extreme plyometric that we can put on the body. Okay. And if you're familiar with the podcast, you're familiar with the training philosophies and things that we talk about in here, we are highly interested in using the most potent methods possible and increasing or accruing the most amount of stress on the body so we can have the best amount of gain, the most amount of adaptation and gain with the minimal amount of time. Okay. Sprinting is going to be perfect for that. Okay. And then obviously sprinting is a specific movement. If your athletes play field sports, they play any sort of sport, they're going to be running, they're going to be sprinting, whether it's more of acceleration based, more top end based. All athletes are going to sprint and they're all going to be moving at pretty high speeds. So this is going to be as sport specific as we can get. Okay. So the next thing I want to move into is some mistakes when sprinting for speed. So everybody thinks they speed train. Okay. Very few people actually speed train. Okay. And this is why we see the disparity between athletes who go to workouts and they go and train, but they don't see their speed improve. Is because they're doing all the work. They're just not doing the correct work to elicit the correct adaptation and the correct outcomes. Okay. And this is where we come in as coaches. This is where we come in and we create the right program, the right stimulus, the right environment for them to get faster. Okay. So the first mistake that I constantly see with sprinting. Okay. And I know this is just a discussion actually. So what is today? Today's June 25th. Okay. I just saw a couple days ago, we were talking about on social media, they were talking about sprint speed. I talk about sprinting all the time on social media. So I really don't remember exactly what this was. But somebody sent me a tweet on Twitter or X, whatever you call it. And it was on a pretty well-named coach, big name coach. He's pretty well known, has a big following. And so he was, kind of saying that like the 1 minute per 10 yards is a little overplayed and athletes don't need that long, and that most athletes just need to walk back before they can sprint again. Okay. This is a huge mistake. Okay. Athletes, one of the main reasons they don't get faster is because they're always running slow. They're always running at a sub-maximal speed. Okay. It's like lifting weights. If you want to get stronger, you have to output maximally. Okay. You have to, take your body to the brink. You have to strain, and then it takes time for your nervous system to kind of rest and, diminish some of the metabolites that may build up, some of the fatigue that may build up, so then it can output again. Okay. The body is very smart. The body wants to stay safe. The body does not want to output maximally. So the only way you can give your body the environment to output maximally is through rest. Okay. Every time that you, kind of shortchange that rest, you are actually damaging or hurting your performance in the subsequent sets. And that's pretty easy to see, right? You can see that in the weight room very easily, but you can really see it in the sprinting. Okay. So if an athlete is under rested, they will not be able to sprint faster. They will end up getting slower, or they will stall their numbers. Right. So what's the fix to this? When an athlete takes a max effort sprint, okay, when they are sprinting maximally, if it is, let's say 20 yards, you want about a minute of rest per 10 yards of sprinting, 1 to 2 minutes. Okay. Your faster athletes are going to need more than a minute. Okay. I can tell you that for sure. Your really fast athletes are probably going to need more like 2 minutes. Okay. And again, you can play around with that kind of as you see fit. You may also notice your larger athletes will also need more time. Okay. But your slower athletes and your very small athletes probably are going to recover a little bit less. Okay. When we think about this just from a mathematical standpoint, faster athletes are delivering more ground force, and the ground propel themselves forward. There's more collisional force happening at the foot and ankle and through the entire body. Okay, that creates more stress and stimulus to the nervous system, right? So that means that if they want to continue to deliver or create that stress, they're going to need more rest. Larger athletes, same exact thing, to which they may not be moving at the same speeds, but they are delivering so much more mass. They are accelerating, propelling so much more mass. So they may actually need more. It's not them being lazy. It is literally because they are just outputting more. Okay. So again, you want about 1 to 2 minutes of rest per 10 yards of sprinting. That is a pretty solid rule. Obviously, you may need more than that if you're like an Olympic level sprinter. But again, in this case, we're talking just about middle to high school to collegiate athletes. That's the populations that I work with. If you work with professional athletes, you can still probably use that rule of thumb as well. But again, about 1 to 2 minutes per 10 yards is pretty perfect. Okay. I really haven't seen anybody have to go much more over 2 minutes, especially if we're trying to also strength train the same session, which I do believe is optimal if we structure right. And maybe I'll do a podcast on like structure. I think I've already done a podcast on structuring training, but maybe I'll go through now and kind of show you guys and talk about my current structure, what that looks like, and what we're doing now with the training. But That's kind of what I think that's a big mistake I see is a lot of people are kind of shortchanging their rest and they're not running as fast. So their fastest time might be on rep 1 or 2 where they're still not even super warm yet, and they're actually losing out on that benefit of sprinting. Okay. The other mistake I see quite often, especially with a ton of the fly 10s, so many people are doing really long distance leading, which is fine. Okay, those are solid. Those are good, especially if you're peaking out for a longer distance race, something like a 100-meter dash, where we're looking at more speed endurance and elastic components than just acceleration and power. But what I think is actually more optimal, and I don't know if this goes against the grain or not, it seems like it does nowadays, but I actually think it's more beneficial to use a shorter lead in and or sprint at shorter distances for a couple of reasons. The biggest one being that if I can hit, if I can run a 30-10 or a 20-10, or I can just run 20-yard dash or 30-yard dash or just maybe even 5-10s or 10-10s, I can accumulate more volume and more first reps, more solid reps, and really continue to hit that stimulus, hit that speed multiple times in a session. Whereas if I run a very long distance sprint lead, or I run, 60-meter dash. I see a lot of baseball players, they run 60s in training. You can really only run a few of those and you're completely burnt for the rest of your session. Okay. Whereas I can have athletes that can run, maybe, 6 to 8 shorter distance ones, or, instead of running two really hard ones or one half-ass one and one really good one, we can accumulate more really quality reps. It's kind of the same sort of component or kind of theory in the weight room, right? Whereas instead of doing like, a bunch of sets of 10, you may do, you may flip it. So instead of doing 3 sets of 10, you do 10 sets of 3. Okay. The West Side Barbell kind of dynamic effort where you're getting a lot of first reps, you're getting a lot of practice, and your reps are staying at a high velocity, right? Whereas if we flipped it, is instead of doing 10 sets of 2, we did 2 sets of 10, your last few reps of that 10 set of 10 are going to really drop off in velocity. Whereas we want the opposite, right? We want to keep speed very, very fast. So instead of giving really long lead-ins and doing a ton of long distance work, doing shorter distance work, and then really right before, if you have to run a 100-meter dash, that's when you maybe peak out for a specific event, or you just use the 100-meter dash you use those track meets as a training component to get you ready for the big meets. Okay. That's something I don't hear a lot of people talking about. I think that it's so important that we can accumulate more efficient and stimulating reps than just, output one really hard rep. And then I feel like it's such an inefficient use of time when I could get 3 or 4 really stimulating reps. And aside from that, a lot of coaches don't have the space to do those really long distances anyways. So when we also think about from a logistics standpoint, it makes a whole lot of sense to, maybe do it the other way and do a little bit shorter distance and accumulate a few more of those. Okay. Other mistakes for sprinting speed. Okay, circuiting with other exercises. This has been a common thing I've seen across at least social media on Twitter or X. You have a lot of coaches nowadays, or right, currently, just with kind of where the trends are at and kind of who's popular or whose methods people are, talking about today. That people are actually starting to circuit and do these little circuits with their sprint work. And they're circuits, and they're calling them contrast training, when in reality they're not really contrast training. They're just jamming a bunch of stuff together for time's sake. But if you're circuiting other exercises with your sprints, like a kid goes and sprints and then comes in and does a bunch of jumping, or comes in and does some squats, or comes in and does another exercise, like you're taking away from that rest. Like even if it's not training the same musculature in your opinion, the nervous system, you're neurally connected, right? You are neurally wired. If you are doing a bench press and then you're going to sprint, okay, and you're doing a back to back, there is still fatigue being accumulated. And while it may not be as specific to the specific movement pattern, the specific musculature that's being used, the body is still neurally coordinated. Okay, you're still wired together. Okay, all the movements work together. So if you are stimulating yourself in one area and then you're trying to circuit with something else, you're going to notice really quickly that those numbers do not move. Okay. Other thing, no feedback devices. Okay. Again, I previously didn't talk a lot about this because I knew how expensive it was. I knew some coaches just really didn't have the ability to, have feedback devices. They didn't have lasers, they didn't have jump masks, they didn't have things like that. And again, for good reason, those things were expensive. They're hard to get a hold of. And the reality of it is not everybody has access to those things, which is okay. Obviously, they're really stimulating and good tools. They improve or increase, they elevate the stimulus we all can get. But I feel like, nowadays with the kind of enhancement and with the new products in the market, and again, aside from my bias, obviously I am biased a little bit towards OVR performance. Okay. One of my really close friends is, a co-owner of the company, has, worked specifically on designing the products. Of course, I'm not gonna be out here and say that I don't have a bias towards them. I obviously want them to succeed. I have their products, but I don't make any money off their products. I'm not sponsored by their products. I use them. I like them. I coach with them. They are by far the best company to go to if you're looking for affordable products. Okay. Again, I don't have a gift code. I have nothing like that. But from coach to coach, from person to person, if you're looking for like an affordable jump device, like you can't find a better jump device than the actual OVR jumps. We've actually gotten rid of our jump mats for those because I think the device is actually nicer. And then for the sprint lasers as well, okay, it's really hard to find the amount of gates and the amount of, additions as far as like in beams and things go from, a device that's probably 4 times the amount of money the OVR is delivering. I have a lot of their different products. I use their products for a lot of different things, and maybe I'll talk about, some of the ways I'm using some of their products. But this is not a sponsored video, but I do want to kind of plug them real quick, just like if you don't have feedback, you will just not see the effort and the stimulus that you're going to get from kids that are on feedback devices. This is just true. I've done dumbbell jumps without feedback devices. They don't work the same. I've done, sprinting without feedback devices. They don't work the same. I don't do any sprinting now without a laser. I don't do any jumping really without some sort of feedback loop, feedback device really. So having no feedback, if you don't have something to time the kids, they're not going to run as hard. That's just the reality of it. Okay. Other mistakes, lifting before sprinting. This is something I really don't like to see. You can get away with it, especially if you're doing an upper body lift before you sprint, but I really prefer athletes to always sprint first. I don't think you can do lower body lifts and then go sprint. I know some people do that. Maybe it's just a logistics thing, but I think you should make every effort possible to sprint first because sprinting, and because it is such a high velocity, higher velocities are so much more susceptible for fatigue. Okay. You can come in every single day and continually add weight to a bar because it's so slow. Fatigue, a bad night of sleep may not really throw you off your bench workout or your squat workout. A bad night of sleep or a bad meal or just a bad temperature can really throw you off your game as far as sprinting. I think that we want to try to eliminate as many of those variables as possible. If we put it early in the training session, really priority number one in the training session, then you're going to do everything you can possibly do as a coach from a programming standpoint to ensure that your athletes are sprinting fresh. And so I think that is super important, is that we are sprinting first and then we move on to our lift. Okay. And then again, kind of going along with lifting before sprinting, one of the major things that I see with coaches and people is not using an advantageous kind of workout structure. They don't structure rest days before you sprint. My athletes always have at least one rest day, at least 24 hours plus before they sprint. Okay, we sprint on Mondays, so we have a couple days during the weekend. We take a full rest day on Wednesdays, and then they sprint again on Thursdays. So they are always getting multiple days of rest really before they sprint. Okay, and obviously we sprint on Monday. We don't sprint until Thursday, so there's some delay there. Obviously we squat and jump between, but they always have at least one day between before they sprint again. Okay. I think that if you are looking at structuring or restructuring your training, it's something you should consider is what is the most potent stimuluses I have in my workouts? And then what things can I not move, right? To me, sprinting is so touchy and sensitive. I can't afford to have it any other days. And I can't afford to have them sprint, a day after a squat or, some of that. They really need rest before they sprint if we're going to get the best possible numbers. Okay. And then the last thing I want to talk about, I want to try to keep this podcast kind of brief. I don't want to stand here too long. I wanted to give you guys something actionable that you could, hopefully apply and not have to listen to me talk for an hour. But sometimes we get to that point. So programming wise, okay, how do you actually program this? What are some things you guys should be doing? Here's what I do. Okay. So as far as like how many sprints should a kid do per workout, really, if we're talking max effort on a feedback device, optimal rest, we're talking really between 4 to 6 like maximum. Okay. Reps. Okay. This will depend on distance. Obviously, we talked previously. If you're running at longer distances, you're probably only going to be able to give like, 2 or 3 good reps. Whereas if you're running like 5 10s, 10 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, really more like 20s to 30. Once you start going over 30, you're really not going to get 6 good reps. But about 4 to 6 reps, especially in those short distance, more of acceleration kind of based sprints, about 6 total reps. And really, I don't really see athletes need 6 for the most part. I think they can get really good stimulus and they can get really good numbers with about 4 max effort reps before we go up, we start lifting. So about 4 to 6 reps is all it takes. Okay. The way I like to really structure the sprinting is this. Okay. Before we would just kind of roll in, kind of do a little mini warm up and then start sprinting, and that was cool and it worked, and we had kids get faster. But really, the last like 6 months or so, I've really been big on doing a lot of like ankle and foot prep work right before we sprint, kind of as potentiation, but also to really kind of just get their nervous system kind of like woken up and kind of wired to do some fast movements. So specifically, we're picking exercises that bias the foot and ankle. This is where I've found that like depth drops actually have some sort of value, as I've really seen them actually work before we go and sprint. I haven't seen a ton of value doing them any other point in the workout, but I've seen that if we do them before we sprint, athletes tend to feel a little bit better. Their nervous system is woken up, and it tends to work a little bit better. Hurdle hops have been something I've been doing a lot right before sprinting, and I've noticed that when kids do hurdle hops, and especially if they have a good hurdle hop performance, they tend to sprint pretty well. And then obviously it makes sense. It's a faster ground contact. We're prepping the foot and ankle to fire quickly, to accelerate quickly, to absorb quickly, and to obviously absorb and redirect mass. So it's kind of like a nice barrier and entry for sprinting right before you go and sprint. So hurdle hops, pogo jumps, I've liked those. I've got those from a close friend, Brandon Bird. Okay, he has a gym, Bird Sports Performance in Pennsylvania. Okay, I don't know where we're at in Pennsylvania right now. I forgot where his gym's located, but I know he's in Pennsylvania. I think he's a little bit outside of um, Philly. He's a little bit outside Philly. I don't know the exact location, but he is someone that I really think does a good job with the foot and ankle work, specifically a lot of the sprinting and plyometric type work. And so he put me on pogo jumps. He actually got them. He got pogo jumps and pogo jump protocol from a Jamaican sprint coach that he knows. So I put my athletes on that. We use them, here and there throughout the year. But I noticed pogo jumps work really well. I like the plyo swing still before we go and sprint. We'll even maybe do a little bit of broad jumping, but really like just short ground contact hurdle hops with the OVR, measuring ground contacts. I like those a lot. Again, we don't do the tall hurdle hops. I do a lot of short hurdle hops because I really want that short ground contact or that fast ground contact. Rebound box jumps, we might do that right before we sprint, but really just anything that you can do to kind of prep that foot and ankle to get ready to move and to really deliver high velocities, right? And to absorb and produce force and kind of just be that vessel is what we're really looking for there. And so I've noticed some big progress with that. And I feel like my athletes just get warmed up. They kind of get in the zone a little bit more when they do that. Rest as needed. Okay. This is the other thing I want to talk about as far as training goes. Okay. When it comes to sprinting, is that when you roll up and we're getting ready to sprint, we want to have a number in mind that we need to beat. Okay. It doesn't do very much good if we roll up and we're like, oh, I don't know what I need to, I don't know what I need to run today. Like the effort and intention isn't there. I always urge my athletes to take a look at their previous PR numbers and see if we can beat those for the day. When it comes to max effort reps, says rest as needed. So obviously rest as much as you need. But a lot of coaches ask me, Coach, how do you know when to shut kids down? How do you know how many reps each kid should run? And the very easy answer is this. Once a kid's numbers, sprints stop improving or get slower, that's when we cut it and we go up and start lifting. Okay. So say a kid runs rep 1 slow, rep 2 faster, rep 3 faster, rep 4 fastest, rep 5 completely tanks. Okay. Or maybe it's a little bit slower. Run another one, completely tanks. There's always going to be that completely tanks rep, pretty much regardless. My goal is every single day that we kind of stimulate, not annihilate. We sprint up until that specific kind of threshold of like, okay, this is all the kid's going to be able to produce today, into, hey, once this kid has that big drop off, he already knows I'm gonna go bench. Okay. Other thing to manage fatigue, okay, because our athletes are sprinting intensely and briefly and frequently, not with tons of volume. If an athlete does not have a PR there for the day, say an athlete runs like 3 in a row and they're just like absolutely cooked, like there's no way they're ever getting a PR today, we'll just cut it and go and start lifting. Okay. I have no problem with that because we do them so frequently. Same with jumping, right? I've really kind of shifted some of my jump programming around a little bit to be more geared on just like fighting for that PR. And if it's not there, kind of shutting it down. I could talk more about that maybe in a different podcast. I talked about jumping previously, but really just putting emphasis on the performance rather than the amount of work. If the emphasis is on the performance, everything goes better. If the emphasis is on just getting the work done, nothing ever goes to plan. Okay. And again, some athletes need more, some athletes need less. So that allows them to kind of auto regulate and just be like, hey, my performance is really good today. Let me take a few extra. Hey, my performance is trash. Like I had a kid jump. So we were jumping in the OVR just a couple of days ago, and he jumped a. He dumbbell jumped with the 30s, a 29-inch vertical on the OVR, which is like a 33 or something, 32, 33 on a jump mat. So that's what he's been, right around. His regular vertical jump has been like 33, 34, like not that much disparity. And again, he's more of an acceleration based athlete. He's not super elastic, very strong, explosive, but not super elastic. So you will see some of that kind of gap or discrepancy not be as large versus an more elastic athlete that really does rely so much on a stretch shortening cycle and really struggles with load. But anyways, back on point. He jumps 33.9 on like his second jump. And then he jumps 34.3, 34.6. And I think his PR was 35.3 or 35.4, something like that. And we knew he was coming up for a big PR. His dumbbell jumps been PRing like every week for some weeks now. We've been patient. He's been doing what he's supposed to do. His weight's going up a little bit, but not too much. So anyways, he jumps, like a 34.6, and then his next jump was a 34.3. So he went down a little bit. He's like, Goodman, should I keep jumping? I'm like, yeah, keep jumping. Like, this is the best averages you've had in weeks, of course. Like, so that's strike when the iron's hot. He keeps jumping, boom, 35. Next jump, boom, 35.2. Boom, next jump, 35.6. Like, just continues to roll, right? We wouldn't have been able to hit that jump here if we would have shut him out a little early. So like, you got to look at the averages too. Like kids might have like a fast one, a little drop off, and then boom, they explode in that last one, they hit a PR. So you kind of have to play around with a little bit. But again, the focus is always on the performance versus just getting the work done. Obviously, if you have a time cap, you have to adjust a little bit. Maybe, you give them a hey, you got 4 or 5 reps, make the most of them. Here's all we can do for the day. But if possible, I would rather see you cut some accessory work off, cut some lift off, and let them really chase that one sprint PR versus, maybe letting them stop early before they hit a new PR. Okay. Um, the other thing I wanted to, touch on quickly before we're off here today is we aren't very fancy. Okay. I talk about this all the time. I despise like the fancy training, the complex training. Like when I look at something and I'm just like, and here's the thing is like I've read so much, I've learned so much, I've studied and I've talked to so many smart people. If I look at something, I'm like, that just seems way too convoluted. Like it's an instant, yup, that's way too much. Okay. The reality is this. Anything, I've said this on social media, anything that is advanced or complex has been made simple by somebody. Okay. I think about this a lot when it comes to jumping. Okay. Loaded jumps for so long were so like convoluted. Nobody really knew how to set them up or do them. And then somebody really smart came along and made a system that was very simple, very repeatable, very predictable. Okay. I'm referring to Jared Bidney at Explosive Mechanics. Okay. Um, the same thing can be said about a variety of different methods. At some point, something that was confusing, something that was advanced, something that was complex that people couldn't grasp, somebody else came along, took that idea and made it simple and made it usable and made it repeatable and predictable. Okay. I hate getting fancy because to me, if somebody is doing a bunch of complex and kind of just misconstrued fancy work, to me, it really comes off more like they don't really know why they're doing it. They're just doing it. Okay. I like to keep things very basic and very simple from the very fact of my athletes can look at it and they can do it without me having to be right next to them, right? If they can read the instructions and they can read the exercise and they know exactly what to go and do, that is so much better than having some like convoluted type of program that just makes no sense on paper. Okay. It's cool to do your A1, A2, B1, B2, all this crap. But the reality is you want to be able to have athletes look at the program and know exactly what to do, make it very easy, very simple. So then you can pour in your effort in other ways, right? I'm not going to be my best coach if I have to re-explain every single thing because I made the program look crazy on paper, right? Whereas if I make it simple on paper, if I make it very structurally simple, I can pour energy into actually coaching, actually watching, actually picking numbers, actually doing the stuff that really moves into the small details that really move the needle versus having to re-explain everything. So I think that's something to consider, especially if you coach large groups like high school athletes, middle school athletes. Just make the programming very simple. Like no other coaches are going to look at that and think, oh, it's too complex or, oh, it's too simple. It's not complex enough. It's not good training. Like the reality of it is 99.9% of people know nothing about training and they can't tell the difference between your program and the bodybuilder magazine program. They have no idea. Okay. So that would just be my suggestion is stop getting so fancy and start doing what works, start keeping things very simple and just attack the work. If you keep it simple, kids will attack it. Right. But that is all I have for this episode. Hopefully you got a little bit out of this as far as sprint programming goes. This is kind of how we structure it. We're going to keep things very simple and very basic. That's really kind of a lot of my philosophy as far as all the training. Take the complex, make it simple. Okay. If you have any questions, as always, you can reach out to me on X or on Instagram. Okay. I'm very active on both of those. I try to post stuff all the time. I try to share as many videos as I can get of my kids. I try to share as much information as I can. Other kind of shameless plug, I did just put out a developing the bench press for athletic performance presentation that I actually presented to a couple good friends in a facility in California. Shout out to Blake and his crew for letting me do that. It was a lot of fun. But I put that together for them. But I know a lot of coaches expressed interest as to how they could get their hands on that. That is available now. If you get a hold of me, I will send that over to you. But that's kind of all I have for today. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out and let me know. Hit me up if you want to, figure out how to get access to that presentation. It's a 70-minute video, 20 plus slides. I break down all the programming, all the teaching, structures, brief maximal tension waves. Everything is in there for you to have access to. And then also plug to my Train Heroic groups. I have two Train Heroic groups. I have my Train Heroic group, my general programming, where I post all of my athletes' programming. So whatever we do with my kids, I post it on there every single week so you guys can see what we do. It's not custom to you. It is based off my athlete training. I literally copy and paste my athletes training onto the Train Heroic group so then people can use it for whatever they need. I have athletes on there that use it, verbatim. I have coaches who use it verbatim. I have coaches who take parts of it. I have some coaches right now they're using the bench programming off of it. So whatever you need that's kind of available to you. And then obviously I have custom programming where I do work with some athletes individually based on their goals, their training history, all that good stuff. So those are all available. Again, if you have questions or have interest, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to talk with you. Okay. And that'll be it. Thank you for tuning in. As always, I appreciate it.